The wind clawed at the windows of the little ranch house on Maple Street with a ferocity that made the old glass rattle in its frames, as though the storm itself wanted to get inside and see what was left to break. It was 4:47 a.m. on December 28th, and Elmwood, Iowa, lay buried under another foot of fresh snow. The streetlights outside glowed faintly through the swirling white, turning the world into a soft, muffled blur. Olivia Thompson stood alone in her narrow kitchen, one hand braced against the cool Formica counter as if it were the only solid thing left in her life, the other wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. The only light came from the single bulb over the stove, casting long, weary shadows across the faded linoleum floor, and the scarred oak table where a stack of envelopes waited like silent accusers. The top one bore a stamp that read "Final Notice" in bold crimson letters that seemed to pulse in the dimness. She didn't need to open it again. She had memorized every threatening line. 18 months. 18 long, grinding months since Daniel Harper had loaded his duffel bag into his silver pickup truck, kissed the kids on their sleeping foreheads, and driven out of her life forever, taking every promise they had ever made and leaving behind 2 confused children, a mortgage she could barely cover on her hospital salary, and a mountain of hidden debt that grew taller and steeper with every passing week. Olivia was 39 years old, but on mornings like this she felt ancient, as though the weight of the past year and a half had added decades to her bones. The fine lines around her hazel eyes were no longer the laugh lines they had once been. They were worry lines now, etched deep from too many sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, running numbers in her head that never quite added up to hope. Her brown hair, once worn loose and shining on Sundays when she and Daniel took the kids to church, was now perpetually twisted into a hurried knot on top of her head because brushing it properly felt like a luxury she could no longer afford the time for. She worked the front desk at Elmwood Community Hospital, a modest 2-story brick building on the eastern edge of town where the scent of antiseptic and burnt cafeteria coffee mingled in the hallways. Patients checked in for everything from flu shots and broken bones to chemotherapy and the quiet, unspoken heartaches that didn't show up on any chart. Olivia was the first face most of them saw when they walked through the automatic doors, and she greeted everyone with the same gentle, practiced smile that said, "I've got you," even when no one in the world seemed to have her. Elmwood was the kind of small Midwestern town that people in bigger cities romanticized without ever understanding what it really meant to live there. Cornfields stretched in every direction for miles, broken only by silver grain silos rising like lonely sentinels against the vast sky, and the occasional windbreak of cottonwoods shielding century-old farmhouses from the relentless prairie wind. There was one blinking stoplight at the center of town where Highway 65 crossed Main Street, a water tower painted with a proud wildcat mascot whose black and gold stripes had begun to peel after too many harsh winters, and a tidy grid of brick storefronts, some still thriving with family-owned hardware stores and beauty salons, others boarded up with dusty for lease signs in the windows. Summer smelled of fresh-cut hay, charcoal grills on back decks, and the sweet, dusty scent kicked up by massive combined harvesters rolling through the fields at dusk. Winters smelled of wood smoke curling from chimneys, diesel exhaust from snowplows rumbling down the streets at dawn, and the sharp, metallic bite of sub-zero air that burned your lungs if you breathed too deeply. People here waved at strangers from their tractors, showed up unannounced with casseroles and snow shovels when someone was sick or grieving, and packed the high school football stadium every Friday night in fall, bundled in blankets and parkas, cheering under the bright floodlights as if the outcome of the game could determine the fate of the entire town. It was home. It had always been home. And now more than ever, it felt like a place that watched her struggle in silence and whispered behind polite smiles and sympathetic nods. Olivia had grown up just 2 blocks away on Elm Street, in a near-identical ranch house with pale green shutters and a wide front porch where her mother used to sit shelling peas or snapping beans on summer evenings while neighborhood kids rode bikes up and down the sidewalk until the streetlights flickered on. Her father, Raymond Ray Thompson, had been the best mechanic in 3 counties, the kind of man farmers trusted with their million-dollar equipment because he could diagnose a problem just by listening to an engine cough. He had a quiet laugh that rumbled deep in his chest and hands that were always stained with grease no matter how hard he scrubbed. Her mother, Ellen Marie, had taken in sewing and alterations from her kitchen table, turning neighbors' worn-out dresses and suit pants into something respectable again while humming old hymns under her breath. They weren't rich, far from it, but the house was always warm in winter, the pantry always stocked with home-canned tomatoes and peaches, and love was never rationed. Ray taught Olivia how to change her own oil, rotate tires, and check transmission fluid before she was 12. "Life doesn't always send help when you need it, Livy," he'd say, wiping grease from his hands with a red shop rag. "You gotta know how to fix what you can yourself." Ellen taught her how to stretch a dollar until it screamed, how to make a hearty meal out of whatever was left in the fridge, and how to listen to people without judgment, letting them talk until the hurt spilled out. Those lessons had carried Olivia through high school graduations, first jobs, and early adulthood, until suddenly, terrifyingly, they weren't enough anymore. She lost them both too young, in a way that still felt unfair when she let herself think about it. Her father's heart attack came without warning on a sweltering Tuesday in July when she was 24, right after she had finished her medical office administration certificate at the community college in Mason City. He had been under the hood of a neighbor's tractor in the shop behind their house, stood up too fast in the heat, clutched his chest, and collapsed onto the concrete floor. By the time Olivia got the call at work and raced home, the ambulance was already there, but he was gone. She remembered kneeling beside him, holding his still warm hand, begging him to open his eyes, as if love alone could restart a heart that had simply given out. Her mother lasted 3 more years, but the stroke that took her came just as cruelly. One morning Ellen complained of a headache while making breakfast, sat down at the kitchen table to rest, and never got up again. The damage was massive. She lingered in a nursing home bed for months, eyes open but vacant, unable to speak or squeeze Olivia's hand back when she read aloud from the romance novels Ellen used to devour. When the end finally came, Olivia was 27, suddenly orphaned in a town full of people who had known her since she wore pigtails and knee socks, and completely alone in a way she had never imagined possible. That's when Daniel Harper rolled into her life like a warm front chasing away a cold snap. He showed up at Mabel's diner on a rainy Thursday afternoon in early spring, soaked to the skin from a sales call gone wrong out in the muddy fields, complaining loudly to Mabel herself about Iowa roads ruining his good leather shoes. Olivia was on her lunch break from the hospital, sitting at the counter sipping iced tea and flipping through a dog-eared copy of People magazine someone had left behind. She couldn't help laughing at his dramatic sigh and said, "City boy, you haven't seen mud until you've seen planting season around here." He turned, flashed that easy lopsided grin that would become so familiar, and bought her a slice of Mabel's famous cherry pie a la mode. By the end of the week, he had asked her out to dinner in Mason City. By the end of the month they were inseparable. Daniel was everything Elmwood wasn't: big city polish mixed with small-town charm, quick stories about trade shows and sales trips, ambition that sparkled like sunlight on water. He sold heavy farm equipment for a company based in Des Moines, driving all over Iowa, Nebraska, and Missouri, closing deals on combines, planters, and grain carts that cost more than most people's houses. He could talk a skeptical farmer into believing tomorrow's harvest would be twice as big if he just invested in the right machine. Olivia loved the way he made her laugh until her sides hurt, the way he brought excitement and possibility into her quiet, predictable life. He took her to concerts in Omaha, fancy steak dinners in Kansas City, weekend getaways to little bed and breakfasts in the Amana colonies where they walked hand in hand through quilt shops and wineries. When he proposed under a full harvest moon in the cornfield behind her parents' old house, down on one knee with a ring he had saved 6 months' commissions for, she didn't hesitate for a second. They married the following June in a simple but beautiful ceremony at the county courthouse, followed by a reception at the VFW hall that half the town turned out for. Olivia wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered by Ellen's old sewing friend to fit her frame, ivory lace that whispered against the floor as her father's best friend, Tom Riley, walked her down the aisle. Daniel looked impossibly handsome in a rented black tux, eyes shining with tears as he promised to love her, in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer. Neighbors brought potluck dishes that filled long folding tables, tuna noodle casseroles, 7-layer salads in glass bowls, homemade pies and sheet cakes decorated with plastic bride and groom toppers. The local band played a mix of old country songs and new pop hits, and everyone danced until the wooden floor shook and sweat beaded on foreheads despite the air conditioning struggling against the summer heat. Olivia remembered spinning in Daniel's arms to "I Cross My Heart" by George Strait, her white dress flaring around them, believing with every fiber of her being that this was forever. Grace Elizabeth Harper arrived 2 years later, on a snowy February morning that shut down half the county with blizzard conditions. She was tiny and fierce and perfect, with Olivia's thoughtful hazel eyes and Daniel's dark curly hair. She slept through the night by 6 weeks and smiled at everyone who peeked into her crib as if she had already decided the world was a good place. Michael Raymond came 3 years after that. Born in the middle of a violent summer thunderstorm that knocked out power to the hospital for 2 hours and turned the parking lot into a shallow lake. He was colicky and loud and always in motion from the moment he drew his first breath, but when he finally fell asleep on Olivia's chest, his tiny fist curled around her finger, the world felt perfectly right again. For a long time, life felt exactly like the dream they had promised each other on that dance floor. Daniel traveled often for work, sometimes gone 4 or 5 days at a time, but he always came home with stories that made the kids' eyes widen and gifts that made them squeal. A stuffed bunny for Grace from a trade show in Chicago. A bright red toy John Deere tractor for Michael from a dealership in Lincoln. A delicate silver necklace for Olivia with a heart pendant engraved, "Forever and Always." They bought the little ranch house on Maple Street when Grace was 2, painting the nursery a soft sunshine yellow and planting lilac bushes along the fence line that filled the yard with fragrance every spring. Olivia worked part-time at the hospital, cherishing the daily rhythm of daycare drop-offs and pickups, library story hours, playdates at the park, and lazy Saturday mornings making pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse. Summers meant backyard barbecues with neighbors, the kids splashing in the inflatable pool while Daniel manned the grill, flipping burgers and telling tall tales to anyone who would listen. Falls meant Friday night lights at the high school football field, tailgate picnics in the parking lot, bonfires in the backyard with esmores and ghost stories that had Grace hiding behind Olivia's legs. Winters meant hot cocoa after sledding down the hill at Riverside Park, Christmas lights strung along the roofline that Daniel swore he would take down in January but never did until March. Michael perched on his daddy's shoulders to place the star on top of the tree while Grace directed from below. The first cracks were so small, so subtle that Olivia barely noticed them at first. It started with money getting tighter than usual. Daniel's commission slowed, bad harvests 2 years in a row, farmers holding on to old equipment rather than upgrading, the broader economy stuttering after the recession everybody still talked about. He started talking about side investments that would set them up for good. Real estate flips, cryptocurrency. Some app a friend was developing. Olivia saw new credit cards arriving in the mail with higher limits, charges she didn't recognize. Nice steakhouses in cities he visited for work, cash advances at casinos, hotel bars in Des Moines and Chicago. When she asked gently over dinner one night, he kissed her forehead and said, "Don't worry your pretty head about it, Liv. It's all part of building our future. One big score and we'll be set." She wanted to believe him. She did believe him. Love, she told herself, meant trust. Then the late nights turned into missed calls entirely. Texts that went unanswered for hours, sometimes a full day. A new cologne she didn't recognize lingering on his shirts when she did laundry. He started snapping at the kids over small things. Spilled juice, loud toys, behavior so unlike the patient, playful dad. They knew that Grace began tiptoeing around him when he was home. Olivia told herself it was stress. The job was hard. Sales targets were brutal. They would get through it like they always had. The night the truth exploded was painfully ordinary until it suddenly wasn't. Daniel was home for once, exhausted from a long week on the road, snoring softly beside her after a quick dinner and even quicker goodnight to the kids. Olivia couldn't sleep. Something nagging at the edges of her mind like a splinter she couldn't quite locate. She slipped out of bed, padded barefoot to the living room, and opened his laptop to look up a cookie recipe for the church bake sale. When she lifted the screen, an email notification popped up immediately. Subject line: "Can't stop thinking about last night. Sender Rebecca Simmons." Her stomach dropped as if the floor had vanished beneath her. Hands trembling, she clicked. The messages stretched back 8 months. What started as innocent work complaints and shared jokes had turned intimate weeks in. Hotel rendezvous between his sales calls. Explicit photos. Plans for a future together. "I love how you make me feel alive again," Daniel had written. "Elmwood is suffocating me. The routine, the kids, all of it. I can't wait until we can be together for real. No hiding, no guilt." Olivia sat on the couch until the sky outside turned from black to gray to pale pink, reading and rereading every word until they blurred through hot, silent tears. When Daniel woke at dawn and shuffled into the kitchen for coffee, she was waiting at the table, laptop open in front of her, face pale but composed. "Who is Rebecca?" she asked, voice flat and deadly calm. His face drained of color so fast she thought he might faint. He didn't deny it. He didn't even try. He sank into the chair across from her, head in his hands, and spilled everything. How it started as a drink after a lonely sales dinner in Chicago, how Rebecca, a marketing rep for a competing company, understood his frustration with small-town life, how he felt trapped in a routine he hadn't meant to fall into so young. "I love you, Liv," he said, tears in his eyes for the first time she could remember. "But I don't know if I'm in love with you anymore. I need more. Adventure. Freedom. Something bigger than this." By noon he was packing. The kids watched wide-eyed and scared from the hallway as suitcases thumped down the stairs. Grace clutched her favorite stuffed bunny so tightly its ears flopped over her arm. Michael held onto Olivia's leg like he was afraid she might disappear too. Daniel hugged them both hard, promising he would be back soon, that this was just a little break so Daddy could figure things out. To Olivia he offered nothing but a mumbled "I'm sorry" and a check for $2,000, his last commission before everything fell apart. Then he walked out the door into the first snow of the season, fat silent flakes that covered his tire tracks almost as fast as he made them. Olivia stood at the living room window long after his truck disappeared down Maple Street, Grace tugging at her hand and asking in a small voice, "When is Daddy coming home, Mommy?" Michael echoed, "Home soon." She knelt down, pulled both children into her arms, and lied for the first time of what would become many. "Soon, babies. He'll be home soon." But soon turned into weeks that stretched into months. Child support checks arrived sporadically, $300 one month, $800 the next, nothing at all for 3 months after that. Phone calls to the kids on their birthdays were awkward and short, promises of visits that never materialized. And then the letters started coming, first overdue credit card notices, then collection calls at dinner time, then statements for personal loans and lines of credit Olivia had never co-signed. And finally the discovery of a second mortgage on the house taken out in both their names without her knowledge or signature. Daniel had forged everything. The total hidden debt came to $47,000 on top of their regular mortgage and household bills. Her hospital salary, steady but modest, barely covered daycare, groceries, and utilities even before this avalanche. Now it was a death spiral. She called him in tears and white-hot rage the day the bank letter arrived. He answered once, voice distant and defensive on the other end. "I'm sorry, Liv. Things are tight for me too right now. Rebecca and I are starting over in Chicago. I'll send what I can when I can." He never did again. The town noticed, of course. Elmwood noticed everything, and gossip traveled faster than the snowplows. At the Hy-Vee grocery store, Mrs. Larson from the Lutheran church squeezed her arm in the produce aisle and said, "We're all praying for you and those sweet babies, dear." At the gas station, old Mr. Jenkins shook his head while pumping fuel and muttered just loud enough, "That Harper boy always was too big for his britches. Should have known he'd fly the coop." Patients at the hospital tiptoed around her with sympathetic looks and awkward hugs in the break room. Co-workers left casseroles on her porch with notes that said, "Thinking of you." Olivia smiled through all of it, thanking them politely because breaking down in public wasn't an option. She had children watching her every move, learning how to handle pain from the only parent they had left. Inside the house on Maple Street, the atmosphere shifted like a cold front moving in. Grace, once the chattiest child in her preschool class, withdrew into her bedroom for hours at a time, filling sketchbook after sketchbook with dark, stormy drawings, houses almost swallowed by black clouds, stick figure families where one tall figure was crossed out with angry red crayon. Michael's boundless energy turned destructive. Tantrums at daycare that got him sent home early, pushing other kids on the playground hard enough to draw blood. Olivia attended meeting after meeting with teachers, principals, and counselors, nodding calmly while her heart raced with guilt and terror that she was failing them. Money became a daily, hourly calculation. She canceled cable and streaming services, stopped buying coffee on the way to work, shopped only sales, clipped coupons religiously, bought clothes at the thrift store on half-price Wednesdays. Weekends meant yard sales in the driveway, Daniel's golf clubs and power tools, her own jewelry from anniversaries and Christmases past, even the kids' outgrown toys if they could bear to part with them. Every dollar earned went straight to the highest interest debt or the most urgent bill. Loneliness settled in like the deepest winter cold, pervasive, bone-chilling, impossible to shake no matter how many quilts she piled on the bed. Friends tried to help. Sarah Mitchell from next door brought over pans of lasagna and offered to watch the kids so Olivia could have a night off. Rebecca Olson, who worked the counter at Mabel's diner and bore no relation to the other woman, thank God, slipped free slices of pie or whole meals into Olivia's takeout bags when she picked up dinner on late work nights. But Olivia always declined invitations to girls' nights or coffee dates. "I'm just too tired," she'd say with a tired smile that didn't reach her eyes. The truth was more complicated. She was terrified that if she let the carefully constructed mask slip even once, she might shatter completely and never manage to piece herself back together. Nights were the hardest. After the battles over homework and vegetables, after bath time and stories and tucking in with extra kisses to make up for the missing ones, when the house finally fell silent, Olivia would sit on the edge of her bed or out on the porch swing wrapped in her mother's old quilt, staring at nothing. The bed still smelled faintly of Daniel's cologne for months after he left. She washed the sheets obsessively until the scent was finally gone, but the emptiness remained. She would scroll through old photos on her phone, family vacations to the Ozarks, Grace's first dance recital, Michael's toddler birthday parties, ordinary Tuesdays when they had all been happy together, and wonder where it all went wrong. Doubts circled endlessly. Was she not exciting enough? Not pretty enough anymore after 2 pregnancies? Had she failed him somehow by loving their life too much while he clearly hated it? The thoughts looped like a broken record until exhaustion finally pulled her under. Setbacks came in relentless waves, each one threatening to be the final straw. One brutal February night the furnace quit entirely. The temperature outside plummeted to -12 with a wind chill that made it feel like -30, and inside the house it wasn't much warmer within hours. Olivia piled every blanket and comforter they owned on the kids' beds, then camped out in the living room with them on the couch, running 2 borrowed space heaters from Sarah next door and telling silly made-up stories by flashlight to keep them from noticing how cold their noses were. She didn't sleep at all, listening to the wind howl like a living thing and calculating repair costs in her head that made her stomach knot. In the morning she called every heating company listed in the phone book, voice cracking as she begged for payment plans or discounts. Tom Riley, the same Tom who had walked her down the aisle and who had learned his trade from her father, showed up in his service van and fixed the furnace for half the usual price. "Your dad pulled my family out of a tough spot once back in '98, he said quietly as he packed up his tools. "Pay me when you can live. No rush." She cried in the kitchen after he left, tears of relief and deep shame mixing together on her cheeks. Spring brought mud and the false promise of renewal. The divorce papers arrived in April, delivered by a process server who caught her at the hospital front desk between patients. Daniel wanted it finalized quickly, joint custody on paper, though he hadn't seen the kids in over a year, and half the equity in the house, as if there were any equity left after his secret second mortgage. Olivia found a lawyer willing to work pro bono through a women's resource center in Mason City. Spending evenings she should have been sleeping poring over financial documents under the weak kitchen light. The mediation session in Des Moines was one of the worst days of her life. Daniel sat across the polished conference table looking thinner, older, a new gold watch glinting on his wrist and a faint tan that certainly hadn't come from Iowa winters. He barely met her eyes the entire time. When the mediator asked if they had anything to say to each other, Olivia's voice came out steady and ice-cold. "You broke everything we had. You don't get to take what little is left." He flinched but stayed silent. They signed the papers. She drove home through a violent thunderstorm, pulling over twice on the side of the highway to be sick in the ditch as lightning cracked overhead. Summer heat brought new challenges. The central air unit struggled valiantly, then quit entirely during a week when temperatures topped 95 degrees with humidity thick enough to chew. Ceiling fans and open windows weren't enough. The kids were miserable and cranky, Olivia worse. The repair estimate came in at $1,200 she absolutely did not have. She put it on the last credit card with any room left, watching the debt climb yet again and feeling the familiar panic rise in her throat. Grace started having nightmares that summer, waking up screaming for Daddy in the middle of the night. Michael wet the bed for the first time since he was 3, something the pediatrician said was common in children experiencing major stress. Olivia held them both in the dark, rocking and whispering promises she prayed she could keep. That everything would be okay, that Mommy was here, that they were safe. Even as her own heart fractured a little more with every sob. Then came the October afternoon that almost broke her completely. She had worked a grueling 12-hour shift, come home to find the water bill 3 months past due with a shut-off warning, and walked in on Michael sobbing because a classmate had called their family broken on the playground. Grace had locked herself in her bedroom and refused to come out for dinner no matter how Olivia coaxed. Standing in the kitchen surrounded by unwashed dishes and unpaid bills, Olivia felt something inside her snap like an overstretched rubber band. She grabbed her keys and drove without thinking, ending up at the old steel truss bridge on County Road 14 outside town. The place teenagers went to park and make out, couples went to talk about their futures, and desperate people sometimes went to think thoughts they shouldn't. The river rushed below, dark and cold under a heavy gray sky threatening rain. Olivia parked, walked to the middle of the bridge, and gripped the rusted railing until her knuckles went white. Wind whipped her hair across her face and tugged at her coat. She didn't think about jumping, not in any planned way, but she thought about how easy it would feel to just stop. Stop fighting. Stop pretending. Stop carrying the weight of everything alone. Tears came hot and fast, blurring the water below. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered to the empty air and the indifferent river. "I'm so tired. God, I'm so tired." Headlights cut through the growing dusk behind her. A truck door slammed. Footsteps crunched on gravel. Olivia wiped her face quickly with her sleeve, expecting some teenager looking for privacy or maybe a county deputy telling her to move along. Instead, Eleanor Harper, no relation to Daniel, thank God, the retired town librarian who had known Olivia since she was a kindergartner checking out picture books every week, stood there in a heavy wool coat and practical boots, gray hair escaping her bun in the wind. Mrs. Harper didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't offer empty platitudes or Bible verses. She simply walked up beside Olivia, put her arm around her shoulders, and stood there in silence while the wind howled and the river roared below them. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Mrs. Harper spoke, her voice soft but clear enough to cut through the noise. "My husband left me in 1978 with 3 children under 10 and a stack of bills taller than I was. I stood on this exact bridge one night and thought the same dark thoughts running through your head right now. But I went home. And I kept going home every single day after that, not because I felt strong, Olivia, but because I had no choice. And somewhere along the long road, having no choice turned into choosing anyway. Choosing to get up. Choosing to love my kids even when I could barely love myself. Choosing to believe tomorrow might be a fraction better than today." They stayed on the bridge until the sky turned indigo and the first stars appeared. Mrs. Harper told stories Olivia had never heard before. About working 2 jobs while raising 3 kids alone, about nights she cried in the shower so her children wouldn't hear, about the slow, stubborn way hope crept back in through ordinary, almost invisible things. A child's drawing taped to the fridge, a neighbor waving from across the street, the first purple crocus pushing through snow in early spring. When Olivia finally drove home that night, something inside her had shifted, not healed, not fixed, but moved a fraction toward light for the first time in 18 months. She started small, the way Mrs. Harper had suggested. The very next week she attended her first meeting of a divorce support group held Thursday nights at the community center. Sarah watched the kids without hesitation. Olivia sat in a circle of folding chairs with 5 other women, some divorced, some widowed, all carrying invisible scars, and kept silent the entire hour, hands clenched in her lap, heart pounding. The second week she managed to say her name, and that she had been separated for over a year. The third week she cried ugly, heaving sobs that embarrassed her until every woman in the room reached out with tissues and understanding arms. By the 6th week she was sharing the raw details. The secret debt, the forged signatures, the loneliness that felt like drowning, the terror that she was failing her children every single day. And for the first time in years she felt truly seen and not judged. She applied for every assistance program she had been too proud to touch before. Utility bill assistance, a single-parent employee grant from the hospital, food pantry vouchers when the grocery budget ran dry before payday. It wasn't much, but it bought precious breathing room. She sat down with a free financial counselor from the resource center and negotiated payment plans with creditors, one by one, until the harassing collection calls finally slowed. At home, She instituted Sunday evening family meetings over frozen pizza or macaroni and cheese. "We're a team now," she told Grace and Michael, holding their small hands across the table. "We talk about the hard stuff together. No secrets." Slowly, painfully, Grace began showing her drawings again, brighter ones now with rainbows arching over houses and 3 stick figures holding hands under blue skies. Michael's outbursts at school lessened week by week. His teacher sent home notes about improvement and even a gold star sticker chart. Winter returned with its familiar bite, but Olivia faced it differently this time. She hung Christmas lights with the kids even though money was tight, baked cookies from scratch, even when it meant staying up late after overtime shifts, played endless board games by the fireplace when the budget allowed for a quart of firewood. Daniel sent expensive toys that arrived via Amazon, drones and gaming consoles the kids opened politely but rarely touched. Olivia quietly donated half of them to the hospital toy drive without a flicker of guilt. Spring arrived muddy and green and full of possibility. Olivia planted flowers along the front walk, petunias, marigolds, zinnias in bright, defiant colors, watching them push through the soil like small daily miracles. She took the kids on picnics to Riverside Park, read books together on the porch swing in the evenings, started running again at dawn when the air was cool and the streets empty and her mind could finally quiet. The debt was still there, a long, long road yet to walk, but she had a realistic plan now: extra payments when overtime came in, a part-time remote job entering medical records after the kids were asleep, slow and steady progress tracked on a chart taped inside the pantry door. Grace's spring dance recital filled Olivia with pride that brought tears to her eyes. Michael's first t-ball season brought Saturday mornings of laughter and sweaty hugs. One warm August evening, sitting on the porch swing with jars of lemonade and fireflies blinking like tiny lanterns in the yard, Olivia looked back over the long, brutal stretch of the past 2 years and saw it clearly for the first time. She had looked strong because she'd had no choice, but somewhere in the relentless march of ordinary, difficult, tear-soaked days, having no choice had quietly transformed into choosing anyway. Choosing to get up each morning even when her body screamed for rest. Choosing to pack school lunches and kiss scraped knees. Choosing to smile at patients even when her own heart was breaking. Choosing to accept help without shame. Choosing to love her children fiercely even when she felt empty inside. Choosing to plant flowers and hang Christmas lights and believe, against all evidence some days, that tomorrow could be better. The pain hadn't disappeared. Some nights she still cried quietly into her pillow after the kids were asleep. Some days the weight of everything still threatened to crush her. But now there were other nights too, nights filled with laughter over burnt pancakes or silly dances in the kitchen. Grace reading aloud from her favorite books in funny voices. Michael falling asleep on her shoulder during movie nights with popcorn and root beer floats. Strength, she understood now, wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself with trumpets or dramatic gestures or viral social media posts. It whispered in the hidden miracles of everyday life. A neighbor shoveling the driveway without being asked. A coworker covering a shift so she could attend Grace's school play. A child's handmade Mother's Day card that said, "You're the best mom ever," in purple crayon. The first purple crocus blooming after the longest, coldest winter anyone could remember. And if you're listening tonight, if you're sitting in your own quiet kitchen staring at your own stack of bills, or lying awake in the dark wondering how you'll make it through another day with the weight of the world on your shoulders, know this, truly know this. You are not alone. You may feel like you're only holding on because you have no choice, but every single time you choose to get up, to show up, to love through the pain, to plant one more flower or tell one more bedtime story, you are building something unbreakable inside yourself. Hope doesn't always arrive with fanfare or thunder or bright neon signs. Sometimes it slips in quietly, through a kind word from an unexpected person, a child's sticky sweet hug at the end of a hard day, or the simple stubborn fact that you made it through another day when you weren't sure you could. You look strong because you had no choice, but darling, that was real deep quiet strength all along. The light always, always finds its way back, one ordinary, miraculous moment at a time. And you beautiful, weary, resilient heart are going to be okay. You already are.